everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar focused on what's next for UI for UWP. My name is John Bristowe. I'm a manager in progress, and again, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join us here. I know you guys are incredibly busy and lots of stuff's going on. So what we wanted to do here today is provide a little bit of a recap of what was announced previous, and also to share with you some of the roadmap items, as well as give you a guided tour of what's latest and greatest in UI for UWP. Joining me today is the lovely and vivacious Tim Heuer. Tim, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so if you guys have any questions at all, feel free to shoot those questions in the questions and answers pane in the GoToWebinar control panel there. And what we're going to do, Tim and I are going to try and answer some of the questions as we go through the content here, and share with you our thoughts and feelings on the latest announcements that have been broadcast publicly, and also to share with you some of our thoughts and feelings on where we think UWP is today and what we're excited about in the future. So for those of you who aren't aware, we had the Windows Developer Day last week. Lots of stuff has been announced, and lots of great things have come out of that day. We had a lot of content that was available. You can go ahead and watch the videos up on Channel 9 if you wish. So all the video content's available there. But a whole lot of great new features have been announced for things such as UWP, whether that's UWP on the desktop or on other devices like the Xbox, including games and gaming. We have new capabilities available inside of UWP around XAML, which I'm sure Tim can speak to, and a whole bunch of other announcements as well. Tim, was there anything that grabbed you out of that day there that you felt you want to highlight here?
I think there's a couple things. You know, we reiterated the kind of commitment to helping developers bring their code forward with you know, more capabilities in the desktop bridge or Project Centennial. Excuse me. And talked about and demonstrated some new ways of being able to even bring new UI aspects into a Project Centennial app by you know, what we call a two-process model. So you could still have your application and actually have a separate process application that would bring, you know, maybe some new views into your experience. So that's something that we were able to demonstrate there. Then you also have Project Rome on the slide there, which is a pretty cool thing that, you know, talks about how we connect experiences from a user standpoint, how we connect experiences across device to device to device, and not just Microsoft devices, right? So one of the things we talked about with Project Rome was, and we released, was SDKs for Android and iOS, and talking about our commitment to making sure that you can kind of transition this quote-unquote state knowledge of your application across multiple devices. So maybe I'm watching a movie on my Surface Pro, and I pause it, and being able to, you know, pick up my iPhone and launch the app on my iPhone, you can make those connections now of understanding, like, oh, well, that person was at this last point, or carry some documents forward, or different things like that. And Rome is one of the technology solutions that we talked more about. And again, the announcement there was more of the external SDK availability there. Mm-hmm. So those are two things that I thought were pretty cool and different than the normal things that we generally talk about in the UWP space.
Yeah, I particularly like the announcement of the developer platform backlog. So this is basically a public forum where people can submit bugs or feedback that they have going forward on Windows development, which is a new change, I think.
Yeah, one of the things that our platform director, Kevin Gallo, talked about is our desire to be more open with our process. And so what we've done is effectively opened up two aspects, kind of views into our engineering process. One is what you note there, the developer platform backlog, which folks can get to at aka.ms/devplatbacklog. And that gives you an opportunity to see kind of what is on the backlog across the UWP platform team. And we try to link with user voice as well, so we can use the kind of upvote mechanism to help us plan our things. And we've gone ahead and made sure that we've noted things that are in development under consideration. So there's a classification of things we're working on. And in addition to that too, there's also the view into the bug system. So we haven't opened it up to directly log bugs just yet, but that is part of the plan. But you can see bugs that we're working on as well, and kind of the progress there.
Great stuff. Now, for those who have been doing UWP for a while, they're probably familiar with the Community Toolkit. What's that all about?
Yes, Community Toolkit is an effort also from the Windows team here, and it really, you know, the word community is in it, of course, and it really has turned out to be quite successful in that regard, that the core team of the UWP Community Toolkit is community members. It's you know, developers like those that are listening on the webinar today that have really jumped in and said, hey, where can we add value to the UWP platform in various aspects? It's not just a UI toolkit. It's not just templates or anything like that. You know, it's a mix of different things. So it started out by pulling together some of the more commonly used UI controls that are already existing in the open source world. But there's a lot of things in there like, you know, network helpers and social connector helpers with regard to like Facebook, and I think there's some ad stuff in there now. So yeah, it's a project that, for lack of a better term, I call it managed by Microsoft. So we assist in making sure that we help with the pull request and do the actual releases. But if you look at the history, and you know, it's on GitHub, and if you look at the history now, it's a pretty thriving discussion among community members, and the core team is really active in looking at pull requests and ideas and trying to manage expectations and priorities, and yeah, it's pretty cool. They have so they just released 1.3, which brought some new controls, but also some more kind of service capabilities there to the toolkit. It's picking up momentum for sure in usage. And one of the things that we can use that for, and actually I just noticed this morning on the project, David, who's one of the project organizers, was commenting to other people, is as the platform starts consuming, you know, these controls and starts getting them more native in the platform, you know, we'll deprecate the things in the community toolkit. So there are things that are in there that are kind of gap fillers right now, but as we look at the, you know, the public backlog now, you can see like, hey, we are working on a tree view, so it doesn't make sense for us, for the community, to invest in that just yet while the platform ships it. And if there is something that's in the toolkit that we now will ship in the platform, then we'll deprecate it in the toolkit and, you know, allow developers to have a clean migration path to the platform capabilities.
I love that philosophy. It almost drives innovation down into the plumbing by doing it that way, because if you've got like a bazillion people using this one aspect of the community toolkit, then you guys can come along and say, hey, this might be a better idea to put this actually part of the platform. So I think that's a great philosophy to have for the project. Yeah,
it's you know, we definitely don't see it as an experimental thing that we're using it as a playground to vet things. Although, you know, that's something that we mutually naturally get benefit out of from customers as well as the platform as a learning mechanism. And even the platform itself, you know, and that's again another thing that Kevin talked about, is we desire to be more open in that regard. So we're thinking about ways that we can even do some of these things with the platform as well. You know, as we develop new controls, you know, how can we co-engineer with the community together to make sure that we're doing the right things, and you know, strategically vet the things together. So there'll probably be some more information on that in the long run, but those are things that we're thinking. Like Windows has a renewed desire to be more open in the process. We just have to take a little bit more of a measured approach there. You know, Windows is a pretty big source code base, and so we internally have to start developing differently in order to make that attainable.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you guys want to find out more about what happened during Windows Developer Day, which was last week, as I said before, again, you can go ahead and check out the various blog posts that have been posted there. As I said, all the video content is available up on Channel 9, so you can go ahead and check that out. And there are also subsequent blog posts that went out talking about some of the highlights, along with links to the various things that were mentioned during the day. Tim, was there anything else that you want to mention regarding Windows Developer Day itself?
No, you know, there was the keynote was kind of intended to be a summary of things, you know, as these events are. But as you mentioned, there was some sessions afterwards that were some deeper dives. There were some interesting things, you know. So we announced things about Cortana skills as an example in December. and there was more demonstration of that and the capabilities that were shown at the developer day as well. So for those who are interested in that aspect and kind of doing some more voice enablement for your app experiences, that's definitely worthwhile to check out.
Yep, great stuff. So another aspect that obviously ties into this that I wanted to give you some time to talk just briefly about is the .NET Foundation. This is a great sort of initiative by Microsoft to basically get some support around the organizations and people who are involved with .NET and with open source.
Right. So the .NET Foundation, I'm trying to remember how old it is now, but it was created as an independent organization. So it has a board of directors, an advisory council, some steering groups. There is Microsoft staff on there, and in fact, there was just announced a new executive director for the .NET Foundation. But yeah, the goal is an independent organization to kind of shine the light and foster this open source nature in .NET projects and the .NET ecosystem in general. There's a lot of projects that have contributed to the foundation now. If people weren't aware of the .NET Foundation, if they go to the website and look at the projects, they're probably using quite a bit of the contributions that are already there. In the Windows space and in the UI space, like MVVM Lite is a good example. That's one of the more popular one that's used, and that's a member of the foundation. And so it's a really good thing that bringing the .NET open source ecosystem together in one place and providing resources for those projects to be successful, and to kind of provide an area as well to have some kind of central messaging around the mission of .NET and open source in general.
Yep. So the reason why I mentioned that is because obviously it provides a nice segue into Telerik UI for UWP. See, that was a plant there for me. So one of the things that was announced during the developer day was, of course, the open sourcing of Telerik UI for UWP. So this is a suite of 20 or more, 22 roughly, UI controls for UWP. We published the source code up on GitHub. We have issues. We're tracking those. We're accepting pull requests. We have a committer's license. We have a committer's agreement that you can go ahead and sign. We are licensed under Apache 2, so very liberal license, very open license for you to get involved with. We do have a package available up on Nuget today, so if you're not willing to build the source, which is totally understandable, you can go ahead and just grab the package there and start utilizing the controls today. We do have a professional support option available as well, so that's part of that offering there. But again, you can go ahead and check out these controls. And you might want to learn more about this. You can go check out our website, which is at telerik.com/UWP. There you'll find sort of a marketing site, but it will give you a general overview of what is available in the stack itself. But as I said before, lots of great controls in there. So what's in there specifically? So a lot of line of business applications are going to address generalized problems in similar ways. And so what we've tried to do with UI for UWP is provide controls that allow you to tackle those problems with controls that allow you to visualize or aggregate or encompass user input in consistent manners. So some of the top highlight controls revolve around data management. So in particular, we have a thing called the data form, which we'll talk about later, which allows you to generate UI for data input. A big one that a lot of people are going to obviously gravitate to is the grid. So Telerik has a long history of building out grids. We have many grids for many various different stacks out there, including ASP.NET, WPF, front-end stacks like in JavaScript, for example. And so grids are still the lifeblood of many line of business apps, and UWP is no different. So we have a wonderful grid that's highly interactive and highly customizable that you can go ahead and use there. Another great one is, of course, the list view, which is basically a templatized scrolling list that you can use for iterating through items quickly, has touch support, is adaptive, can do a lot of rich interactions and animations, so lots of great stuff there. The other one that I did want to mention is the chart, which is under our data visualization category. Obviously, when you have data, you want to be able to visualize that in a way so that people can get answers it's hard to look at data in a grid, right? You just like where's the pattern here? So a chart or other forms of data visualization give you a way of basically discerning those patterns quickly. And so charts are critical for line of business applications, and we provide one. And those charts themselves support a wide variety of operations, and that's, again, another control that historically Telerik is well known for. We have charts in pretty much every app space there is. So having bar charts and radial charts and all kinds of different charts turns out to be a pretty important thing. So these and other controls are available to you now. They're available as open source in the UI for UWP framework. And you can go ahead and use those as you see fit. What I'd like to do now is just quickly jump over to my Windows 10 instance here and just give you a sense of some of those charts and various other controls and actions. So as an example, the chart itself is highly dynamic and provides a rich set of visualizations. These are basically very easy to get up and running, just basically added control in XAML, and away you go. We have interactions that you can go ahead and play with as well in terms of these charts themselves. We have various things like annotations for various lines that are on the chart itself. You can see we have various types of interactions available there. If you're mapping financial data, if you're interested in that, for example, you can go ahead and utilize that. We have pie series charts as well, donut charts. So there's lots of interaction that you can go ahead and utilize. And of course, these ones will scale up and down depending upon the device platform you're running upon via UWP. So that's the chart, which is a very popular one. Another one that's going to be obviously popular is the grid. So the grid itself, it doesn't really require too much of an explanation other than the fact that it's just a table of data. But being able to have a table of data that's highly performant is critical for obviously large data sets, and so the grid itself can handle that. We have a variety of different options available for the grid itself. So for example, I can set an edit mode for a double tap. Otherwise, I can go ahead and change that to an external sort of pane that will bring that up, and that's just a configuration option that you can set for the grid within XAML. I can go ahead and freeze comments if freeze columns if I wish. So as I scroll right or left, you can see the name column is kept frozen there. And that stuff's important, obviously, for data that needs to be referenced or cross-referenced across rows. So you can go ahead and configure that. We have a variety of interactive changes that you can go ahead and make as well if you wish. So you can obviously set resizing modes and a whole variety of other options. So the chart itself turns out to be really, really nice for that. And again, you can embed a whole bunch of things within there. So you can have spark lines, you can have charts within the grid itself. So there's lots of options available there. Another popular control.
John, I see a question here talking about people are observing you going through the sample, and the question was, hey, is the sample app that you're playing with available in the store?
Yeah, so the sample app is not available in the store yet. This is something that you'll get from if you create today. So a couple things. When you release an open source project, you suddenly realize when all these questions come in, like, hey, where's this, where's that? And I think we're going to make some, as we talk about the roadmap, we're going to be talking about things like this examples app that we'll be publishing as a QSF. So these and other types of examples we'll be publishing to GitHub. And so our intention there is to make that available. If you want this today, you can go ahead and create a free account on Telerik.com and download the examples app through your account profile. But apologies for that in advance. It's just one of those things where we're so focused on the code for the framework itself that there's lots of other things that we want to make available as well. Docs being another thing as well. So your patience is appreciated. The engineering team is going as fast as they can with this, but we'll make this source code available at a future date. Was there any other questions there, Tim?
Look.
Again, we want to make sure that your questions are answered here. So I'm just going to take a look at some of the questions here. So we answered that one. Is the current version fully stable? I hope well, that's the intention. So yes, it is. I guess that's a good answer. Another interesting one is the data form. So I just wanted to show you what these things look like, and then we can jump into some of the code here. So what you're seeing here is nothing too special. You're seeing basically a standard sort of user input sort of screen or view where we have a name, an age, a date that we're specifying, and then maybe some other information. What this is doing is this is based on a control we have called the data form or the property grid. And what this does is it auto-generates this UI at runtime based on the item that you provide, the business object that you provide. So it's able to take an item, inspect it, evaluate the various types present on the business object that it's bound to, and auto-generate a user interface based on that business object. So in this example here, we can put things like placeholder text through attributes. You can specify, and it will auto pick up things like whether it's a Boolean, whether it's a numeric, whether it's a string, whether it's a datetime, etc. But you can customize this to your heart's content as well. So what essentially the data form does is it provides a very powerful mechanism for auto-generating these user interfaces based on a type definition or class definition. You can also specify things that are read-only. So here I'm clicking this checkbox here, but it's not doing anything, and that's because through an attribute on the class definition, this property has been marked as read-only. So you can specify things like that. We also have things like built-in validation as well that you can go ahead and specify. You can create customizations as well if you wish. So here we've gone ahead and changed the background color of the label and text box here present within the data form itself. So just on that note, let's just jump into a little bit of sorts looking at the data form itself. And in particular, let's just take a look at the attribute-driven one. So if we just take a look at the example here, you can see I've got my my XAML definition here, and inside here I have my data form, and this is bound to a particular business object that's available through the binding itself. And so nothing special or magical is going on there in terms of the XAML itself. I just simply bind it to the business object, and then through the plumbing that we provide through this, we can go ahead and discern or create the user interface on the fly. So the item in question is this one, public class item. And you can see here through the attributes I can specify various things like, for example, what name I want to give for the header. So I want to say this is age, or I want to say that this is full name or whatever. I can go ahead and specify those. I can also specify things like placeholder text. I can mark things as read-only. And the data form itself will conform to that. All of that is being available through the data context, which is obviously a critical aspect of most .NET applications today. But that's how we go ahead and set that. And we can pre-populate those business objects with items. So what this means is the data form itself provides a mechanism for creating these user interfaces dynamically at runtime through structured types. And it turns out to be a pretty powerful mechanism for performing those types of operations. So take a look at another example. So we have things like a calendar, for example. So you can go ahead and specify a calendar. We can go ahead and specify changes to the calendar. So in this case, I've changed the first day of the week to be set to Wednesday as opposed to Monday, for example. I can select items. I can change the selection for that. I can control styling. Now, I'm not the best with styles, so I'm not a visual designer by any stretch, but you can change those. You can override those as well if you wish. You can also set things like blackout cells for the calendar. And again, that's just one of many controls available there. We also have the sort of canonical date time pickers, for example. So these are the standard ones that you may have seen before and can utilize within the context of a UWP app. You can obviously change those customizations as well. So if I want to make this look like a drop-down list, for example, if I wanted to, I can go ahead and do that as well. We also have some other interesting ones like the radial menu. So for folks who have used OneNote, this might look familiar. This is a similar type of control that we make available called the radial menu, and this allows you to select items within a sort of circular view, and you can make that available based on a touch point or on a mouse click, for example. And there's a whole bunch of other things that you can do with these controls, which turns out to be really nice. So that's the radial menu. Other ones include, obviously, things like looping lists. So looping lists are great because this is sort of like the Price is Right wheel before the showcase showdown. So this is one which will just start at 1 and then go to a last or to a number or whatever list that you have, and we'll simply repeat. So we'll loop over that list over and over again. So you can see I have an item here labeled as 1, and then I have another one here at 10, and then it repeats the list. And so this is the sort of Price is Right $1 sort of idea. But this turns out to be a really useful sort of control for folks who are providing a selection. So imagine if you're building a UWP app that scrolls through sports teams, so teams in the NFL or NHL, whatever. Rather than making a list that just goes from the top to the bottom and then stops, you can make it a looping list so that users may want to choose different selections based on that. You can also change its orientation from, say, horizontal to, from vertical to horizontal. You can also change the item height as well as the item spacing accordingly if you wish. We can give it a small spacing if we want it as well. And so it turns out to be a pretty flexible control for things like that. So that's the looping list. So as I'm going through this, I'm just going to quickly just jump back to the questions here. So one question from Levent is, how can you localize those display names? So internationalization and localization obviously is built into some of the plumbing, obviously, of .NET. For localizing those display names, you're going to have to use also, you have to provide culture and then localize based on resources that you integrate within the app. And so you're going to have to localize those names yourself. As far as the calendar is concerned, if you take a look at the source, which is now available on GitHub, we currently only ship a cultural neutral resource, which is default to English. So we're looking for feedback from folks who are interested in localizing, for example, like the calendar to different cultures and different languages. So for things like the looping list and things like that, obviously you'd provide those names, so you'd localize it yourself. But for other controls, that's something we're looking for feedback on. Another question here came in. It says, how can you set custom validations on the data form? Those are denoted by attributes. So on the item that you basically bind to the data form itself, those will specify validations. And validations are built into the data form as part of the control itself. So you can go ahead and specify those things directly. So for example, if I wanted to, I could go ahead and nuke the name here, and you can see it says that the name cannot be empty and the age under 18 is not allowed. If we take a look at the source for this, for example, for the data form itself, and take a look at the validation here. So we have our data form there, it's bound to our item. Taking a look at the underlying CS file here, you can see we've set our context there with the pre-populated options. And the way that this is done is we have this interface called iSupport Entity Validation. And on there, there's a method that's defined which will be called for the transaction that's occurred when you click on Submit. So in a sense, there's a sort of a context there that's associated with the data form, which is the form of the transaction. And so that property here, which is called Validate Property Async, is the one that will be invoked. And this is where you'll write custom code to determine whether or not the form input itself is valid. So you can go ahead and parse ages, for example, and if there's an error, you'll add it to an errors collection, which will then be displayed based on the submit itself. So that's the interface you need to implement on your item, this iSupport Entity Validation, and then you need to implement that method, validate property async, which will be invoked based on that submit. Just coming back quickly to the questions here, see if we have any other questions. I have a question here from Dave. Says, can you make the looping list look like it does in iOS where the number gets bigger when it becomes the selected choice and smaller when it scrolls to the bottom or the top? I don't think it does in iOS where the number gets bigger when it becomes the selected choice and smaller when it scrolls to the bottom.
It's kind of like a perspective view.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
You know what? I don't know. I'll have to check. Yeah, great question. We get these questions after the fact. You know what I'll do? I'll follow up and see if that's possible, if it's built in the control. Otherwise, it's just a custom. It's just a customization that you would define on the looping list itself. I would imagine it would be available and something that you could possibly do, but I think it's not built into the control itself. So when I answer these questions, I'm assuming built into the control. Anything's available from a customization perspective, right? Meaning, like, if you can write the code, go for it. But in some cases, we just don't have that functionality built into the control. So, yeah, that's what I'm talking about there. All right, getting back to some of the other examples here. So we have some pretty basic ones like the autocomplete box. Gauge might be pretty standard for folks. Range sliders, ratings, etc. These are pretty sort of standard controls that you would see in a lot of various UWP apps. The big ones that we have available in UI for UWP, of course, are the chart, the data form, the grid, and the list view. But that's not to say that these other ones aren't valuable. I mean, certainly if they hit a requirement on your app, then obviously they're going to mean something. So to show you another example, we have various forms of controls here. So we have like a rating sort of control here that you can use. You can change the selection to being from single to continuous, for example. Even Tim has already gone ahead and submitted some issues with this as well. It's a great thing about open source, if you've got some problems with controls, you can go ahead and submit issues with that as well. So we have things like that. We have obviously things like an autocomplete box, which turns out to be pretty valuable. So for example, if I start typing JO, I can get a drop down that appears that shows me based on the autocomplete. We can specify various filter settings here, whether it starts with or contains. So as an example, if I type the letter I, it will find options there. A, as an example, other options there. And the usage for this is again, pretty simple. Anyone coming to this who has any experience with XAML should find this pretty approachable. So defining a namespace for our controls, and then from there, we can specify the usage simply by utilizing the type within our XAML. So pretty simple stuff. Just jumping back to the questions, see if there are any other ones here. Tim, there's a question here for you. It says, will the community toolkit get better love than the one for Silverlight and WPF got?
Yeah, so I'll say the one fundamental difference between the Silverlight toolkit and the community toolkit as it stands now is you can look at the way that the kind of engagement is. So the UWP community toolkit, like I mentioned before, is really to a point where I think in the 1.3 release, like 80% of the code was externally contributed. So it really is already being driven by the community, which is a good thing. And so I think the community will decide how much love it gets is the way I would answer that one.
Okay, sounds good.
And the core team is working. Yeah, the core team is working closely with the engineering team for sure to talk about, hey, what investments are we making in the future for the native control platforms, and does it make sense for the community toolkit to work on X versus Y or whatever.
Sure. Great stuff. Again, if you want to find out more, you can go check out the community toolkit up on GitHub. There's also a web page you can go ahead and reference, which is uwpcommunitytoolkit.com. Great stuff. We have another question here from Alan. Says, are there new controls in the works? Is there a roadmap for the control set? Great question. It's something that actually we should probably address now. So let me just jump over to our roadmap here. So on our list of immediate items that we have for UI for UWP, obviously we're going to look at any pull requests that come in, any feedback that comes from the community, including any enhancements that people will choose to make. One control, we are looking at a set of new controls. We're looking at possibly one called the day view, which will provide sort of a booking sort of view that will relate to the calendar itself. But obviously new controls is part of that work. In the immediate short term, we're looking at things like accessibility. So we want to make sure accessibility is a first-class feature built into UI for UWP. As I mentioned earlier, we're looking at launching a QSF so that people can jump through examples and get their hands, or get kind of familiar with what the controls do, and then see the underlying source. The SDK samples that I showed you is kind of in line with that. And then another thing we're looking to get immediately up there is the documentation, obviously, so people can submit changes for things like, you need to flesh out this section. There's a typo here, a typo there, that sort of thing. So that's what we have based on the roadmap today. But obviously, it's early days. We just shipped this thing, so yeah, we'll definitely make sure to. We welcome any feedback that comes, so feel free to submit an issue up on GitHub, and we'll definitely look at it. So if you want to find out more, you can go and check out our GitHub, which is UI for UWP. It's available there, and we don't. It's basically the source itself. We don't have the docs. We don't have samples. We don't have tests. It's just the basic bare bones. But as I said, if you go ahead and create an account up on Telerik.com, you can get access to the SDK samples available there. We are working very hard to get a QSF written as quickly as we can and available to you, so we'll make sure that that's available. Some other things that I want to just mention here briefly is, one question that comes up is, why would you open source this and why now? Whether you know it or not, I mean, Telerik has been involved in .NET for a long time, like since its inception. We've been heavily invested in .NET. It's a platform that we love. All the people who work at the company just absolutely love .NET, and we've had a long track record of making sure that .NET continues to be well supported from a third-party / community perspective, and we consider ourselves a very active member of the community. That stated, we've actually been increasingly more involved in creating open source projects. So for those of you who have heard of Kenda UI, we about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years, we announced Kenda UI Core, which was basically open sourcing parts of Kenda UI itself. We have a framework called NativeScript as well, which people might be familiar with. This allows you to create native applications that are built in JavaScript, so you can target Angular, etc., and you can build across iOS and Android. We also have our Just Code decompilation engine as part of that as well. All those are available up on GitHub. And so our approach for this has been one of ensuring, to continue to support .NET, and in particular the continuing growth of what's available there. If you want to find out more about these things, you can go check it out up on telerik.com/open. But that's the motivation there is to ensure that we continue to give back, which is definitely part of what we're trying to do as a company and as an organization. So that's part of the sort of messaging that I want to convey there. So we've gone through a demo of some of the controls, and at the moment what I'd like to do is just open it up for any possible questions that you might have for either myself or for Tim regarding the announcements that we've just had, whether it's UI for UWP or things that are surrounding UWP itself. We'd certainly encourage you to ask any questions you may have. But in the meantime, you can go and certainly check out the repository up on GitHub if you want to check out the source code there. Please send us your feedback, submit a pull request, and go build something awesome. We'd love to see any apps that are you guys are cooking and looking to put up on the obviously the Windows Store. But Tim, I did have a question for you, which is, after the what was the reception of the developer day, and did you see a lot of excitement and people sort of like, it certainly seems like, with the Surface and a lot of innovations there, like Microsoft's becoming really hip and cool. Like it's kind of an interesting time right now, and UWP is part of that story. So after the announcement, did you see a lot of people like, wow, this is great, and can't wait to get my hands dirty, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think we did. I think there was a couple like highlights. Like certainly, the open sourcing of the Telerik one was a highlight. The other one that actually surprised me was we did a demo of Edit and Continue in the Visual Studio experience with XAML, and when we work on these releases that are becoming shorter and shorter across the timelines, you kind of forget what's in what build and not. And so I was particularly surprised. People were like, oh my gosh, this is the greatest thing. And I'm like, wait a minute, didn't we already ship that? You know, I was just confused on the timing. But that was one that was a little bit of a delighter to see that positive feedback, because you know, we do a lot of features, both in the platform and the tools and things, and sometimes it's hard to really gauge, you know, how many people actually will latch on to those and use them. So seeing people excited about things, you know, kind of validates the investments, and like maybe we should do more there. And like immediately after we saw the buzz about the edit and continue support for XAML, we said, okay, let's go look at our backlog for those items, and you know, what do we know that's missing there still in that experience, and should we bump the priority of those? So that was really exciting. I think people got excited about some of the Cortana stuff. You know, it's still not yet available to actually play with. So, you know, when you can actually start bashing on the keyboard on these things, you know, they tend to get a little bit more excitement. The day of the event was also, we released a new flight, and you know, new developer flight goes with that, so people are able to try out. I think Kevin mentioned that we're kind of platform complete, so you know, there's going to be no new features in the SDK. So you know, that's a good way to start saying like, oh, okay, this is what's in the next release, so let me start kicking the tires on that. So yeah, it looks like you know, a lot of people took that message of it's platform complete, like, okay, maybe, you know, now I should probably dig deeper into the SDK and see what I can do there.
Yep. Got a few more questions that have come in. Question here is, do you have a NuGet package available for UWP package? I'm assuming you mean UI for UWP, and the answer is yes. If you go up on nuget.org and search for Telerik, you'll see one there for UWP. That's the one you're going to want to grab. It's currently in 1.0.0, so that's the one that you can go ahead and grab there. Another question here is, do you have the project demo available up on GitHub? Not yet, so apologies for that. Another question, can you share the link for the UWP SDK samples app? I guess that's related. So yes, we're going to work hard to get a QSF available as quickly as we can. Question here, hi, the Telerik UI for UWP works for the Progress Developer Studio. Oh, I see. No, that's a little bit different. So that's a little bit different. You know, generally speaking, if you're targeting UWP, you're going to want to use Visual Studio, just because it provides the best environment for that. So Progress Developer Studio wouldn't recommend. Another question here, it says, I don't see on the the downloads of my Telerik account page, I see the MSI and a bunch of other files. It's the bunch of other files section you're going to want to look at. There should be a link there. And if not, what I'm going to do is I intend to write a blog post on getting started, and so I'll provide instructions on how to do that. Question here, does it work with Windows IoT Raspberry Pi ARM? That might be a question for you, Tim. I'm not sure, something you mentioned there, but in terms of this, I guess it really would depend on sort of the graphics capabilities you have available to you. Obviously, Raspberry Pi is just simply a controller. You know, if you have a display output that has a GPU associated with it, and you can somehow draw pixels, then I would guess it would work to some degree. But Windows IoT, Tim? I don't know.
Yeah, so Windows IoT runs the UWP platform, and XAML is a part of that. You know, not being as in-depthly familiar with the Telerik source, I have no reason to think that it shouldn't, because you know the project is a .NET project, so you know you can compile target to ARM. I know that UI for UWP has a direct 2D component into it. That would be the only one that might require some like compiler switch changes or something like that. But generally speaking, UWP XAML works on IoT. IoT is part of the universal platform. So I think we even had like some evangelists demonstrate Raspberry Pi working, no problem.
Awesome. Question here, where can I find a Telerik training in French? I would imagine that would probably come through someone on support, or you can send us an email to support and find out more. Question here, how do you do testing of the UI for UWP across all the Windows devices within Telerik? Are similar testing environments available for automated tests on the community components? That's a great question. So this is something that I think we're aware of, that having a test suite available to showcase kind of like our runs of testing suites against components is obviously something that I think some people would want to see. Testing against Windows devices, we have a ton of devices within the organization. We certainly do tests against a wide range of them. So yeah, we do try and push builds out across them and see how they work. I think Microsoft's done a fabulous job of providing an environment for taking care of a lot of that stuff for us, obviously. So whether it's emulators, etc. But obviously there's no better tests than a true device itself. But automated tests certainly are part of that. And certainly when you look at the source, based on my experience with open source projects, that's one of the things that you want to see. You want to see things like docs, you want to see tests, etc. And since it's early days, that's stuff that obviously we're working on. So great question there. Question here, can we use UWP SDK from Telerik? Do we need to create a professional account? That source is available, so you can certainly grab it today. My recommendation is to obviously use the package. So there's a package up on Nuget that you can go ahead and check out. In fact, I'll just go ahead and show you here now where it is. If you just jump on to nuget.org and do a search for Telerik, you should be able to find it there. But yeah, this is the package here. So this was published just recently, so 4 to 5 days ago. So you can see this is the package manager sort of install here that you can run, and it'll go ahead and incorporate it there. So
I actually recommend that as well. Like I've gotten that question a couple times, and for people that don't deal in source, they're like, oh my gosh, what do I do with this GitHub? How do I install this from GitHub? Right? Is the question I get. And it's like, I highly recommend like get the NuGet package. It's as simple as like an add reference, and then you play with it. And then if you feel like, oh, I would like to tweak this, or I actually found an issue that I can solve. Right. That's where the collaboration starts to kick in, and then you can go in the project and say, here's a better way of doing something, and maybe you submit a pull request and things like that. But it's not necessary to understand GitHub in order to start using the controls, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So you can certainly pull the source in, which is this is the source here, and build this here. We do provide a batch file that you can go ahead and run that will run it off the command line and do a build for you if you wish to go in that direction. What we do is we push our packages to obviously a local directory that you'll pick up into the project that you're creating. Yeah, certainly going the NuGet way is probably the best approach for incorporating this. So, great question. Let's see if we've got other questions here. Got some other questions. Lots of great questions here coming in. One of our engineers is also on the Q&A. He's correcting me on a few things I'm saying, so apologies to Stefan about that. It's always good to get corrected on things that you're saying. So if there are no more questions, we'll just hang out here for 30 more seconds. If you have any questions, go ahead and submit, either for myself or for Tim. Otherwise, we can give you some time back in your day.
I will share, I like the testing questions.
Yeah.
I will share something that we're actually collaborating. I know Telerik is one of them, but we want to collaborate with a lot of ISVs and app developers. We have an open source project called WinAppDriver, which is based on Selenium and a couple other, and Appium. And so it's one thing that we want to better understand client UI scenarios to improve the WinAppDriver testing suite.
Awesome.
So if folks have a passion around testing, I encourage them to look at that and give feedback to our engineering team on that.
So a question about this actually from my end, because I'm interested now. You have my interest now, you have my attention, sort of thing. How does this operate? This is obviously driven through the command line. Okay, I can see it here. Yep. So you have just this exe here, and then okay. So this is sort of like disconnecting you from some of the built-in testing available inside of Visual Studio and allowing you to drive, I guess, this through command line. Is that right?
Yeah, so you could think of it as, there's unit level test and then there's UI testing. This is a little bit more like what akin to what Visual Studio has as coded UI, and uses a lot of the same kind of metaphors there.
Okay, great. So if you want to find out more, you can go to this link up here and check it out. This is great. Any other gems you want to share with us, Tim? Putting you on the spot, that's okay.
Yeah.
I'll go back to the questions, see if there's any that have come in recently. Question is, in the future, we've got a question here. In the future, will Telerik make controls for HoloLens? Great question. I don't know if do we have a HoloLens? I'd have to ask around. They're very hard to get. Tim, can you get me a HoloLens?
Probably not.
To get a HoloLens.
Yeah.
Another question here is, should we use VS 2015 or VS 2017 to build the Git source code? You can use either. It doesn't matter. In fact, to build the Git source code, shouldn't require 2017. In fact, 2015 requires update 3. I know that, so make sure to use that. Yeah, you should be fine to use whatever you wish. So we support both. Question here: do you have any controls to handle the barcode or similar? No, not in UI for UWP at this point. It's a bit of a I understand what the question relates to. Obviously, historically, Telerik has had just a ton of controls for rendering out of barcodes and things like that, and we don't have one for UI for UWP. My advice is to submit feedback, submit an issue, request a barcode sort of rendering control if you wish, and we'll take a look at it. But you've got 22 controls to look at here, so that's not too bad to start off with. And getting some more questions. This is great. How often do you anticipate updates to the stable Nugets? All right, Alan. We just pushed out a .0.0.1 release, so and we've only been out for less than a week. So I think I don't know. We don't have. Generally, the way we do it at Telerik is we push 3 times a year, which are called R releases. So we have R1, R2, R3, and then in between that we have service packs. I would imagine we'll still follow that same cadence going forward. So great question. But if there's a change of plan or anything like that, we'll make sure to communicate that. But I don't think so. So I think it's probably going to follow that same cadence. Another question here: what is the future of traditional desktop applications versus this type of user interface? Thanks. Tim, you might want to chime in here, but my opinion on this is obviously UWP is more than just sort of it's more than just a new type of interface. It's also being able to cross-cut devices, platforms, etc. Taking the best of what we had with, for example, WPF, and lifting it up into new environments, etc. Did you have any 30 seconds on that? I know it's a very sort of. It's
a really good question. It's a really and there put my consultant hat on, and there's it depends is the right answer, right? But it really is a good question that I think the industry is challenging of, like, in a a mobile heavy world, what is the evolution of desktop user interfaces? We see innovation there. From Microsoft, you have things like Surface Hub as super desktop-like applications. other type of input modalities, like somebody already mentioned HoloLens and things like that. We really believe in pen as an input for desktop and tablet type innovations. But I think I think there's always a need for what we as industry folks always refer to as traditional line of business or desktop applications. I don't think that need's going to go away, right? I mean, CRM systems will continue. Bug tracking systems will continue. Forms over data type things will continue. And so it's really an evolving area of like how do we merge mobile experiences that are heavy touch and fluid and things like that to something that really needs to be fast and responsive and fills the screen with like tons of data. And so we at Microsoft are thinking about that, but I think the industry as a whole is like how can we evolve the user experience around that space to make things like a really dense UI of data grid attractable in a desktop situation where fine, I have a keyboard and mouse and that's super effective for me, but my laptop is a Surface Book, and so now I detach it and I don't have those input things. So, can I interact with that super dense data grid effectively anymore? So those are the types of user experience challenges that that we want to think about. And additionally, the desires for quote-unquote traditional desktop applications are changing as well. People do want more than Battleship Gray. So as we evolve design languages across various platforms, I think you'll start seeing some innovation there as well.
Speak for yourself. I love Battleship Gray.
Other questions? Easy, right? Yeah.
That's right. I'm just going to answer, because of time, we've got 4 minutes left here. We're just going to answer a couple more questions, and then we'll have to wrap up. Question here, in the organization we already have a license. Is there a direct relationship between this and the open source? We start using the open source tools. So your license enables, provides support, provides you with an MSI, provides you with builds, et cetera, so that license is extremely valuable, which is part of that offering. That's one of the things that Telerek's very well known for is its support. Obviously, this evolution provides more community input, which is nothing but goodness in my view. You should continue to be awesome, continue just creating UWP apps, and if anything, feel better in the knowledge that you've got this UI control kit now that's being looked at by a lot of different eyeballs. Last question here, have there been a lot of code behind changes for the controls? For example, if I use the calendar control in a Windows Phone 8 app, how likely is it that my existing code to populate the control will still work? I'm not intimately familiar with the history there in terms of the code itself, but I do know that originally we started off the project with a lot of commonality between what we offered on Windows Universal and I think Windows Phone, and a lot of that stuff we were able to sort of keep abstract. And so my gut tells me that if you were to take a project that you targeted towards Windows Phone 8 and just from the controls perspective, I'm not talking from other perspectives, but just from our controls perspective, if you were to move that over, obviously there are going to be some controls that are missing. So there are some controls that don't map over, but in general, the underlying primitives should not have changed too much. But obviously Windows Phone 8, the calendar control itself, the general usage for it is largely the same. Like calendars don't really differentiate too much between platforms. You have things like selected dates, selected ranges, things like that. So I hope that it doesn't change too much for you. That's certainly not our intention, is to break a lot of stuff for customers. Obviously we wouldn't be successful if that were the case. Our intention is always to try and think about, what does this look like for customers coming to the UWP stack from, say, Windows Phone. Can we make that process a little bit easier for them, that sort of thing. All right, with that being said, I'd like to thank you all for joining us here today. I'd like to especially thank Tim for joining me. Tim, thanks. It was great having you, and continue to be awesome on the UWP stuff. I think it's great, the stuff that you guys are shipping out. And is there anywhere that people can go to find out more that you'd like to point them to? maybe your Twitter account or something like that?
Sure. I mean, you can find me at Tim Heuer on Twitter, but also, please, be active in the forums and the various places where we engage. Dev.windows.com is the developer center.
Yep.
So share a lot of news there, and
Okay.
that's also where you can find that backlog as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Tim. And thanks to
thank
everyone who joined us. And really appreciate you guys taking the time. We appreciate the time. You guys are very busy, as we all are. And so thanks a lot for joining us. And hope to see you online and active in GitHub. All right. Cheers, guys.